As dads, some days we feel like we have all the answers, and some days we feel like we don't have a clue. If that describes you, you're at the right place. This is the All Pro Dad Podcast. Welcome to the All Pro Dad Podcast. In each episode, we dive into just one question. We talk about what we've gotten right, mostly what we've gotten wrong. We explore what the experts say and leave you with one small but powerful pro move. I'm Ted Lowe, and today I am joined by two other dads, Bobby Lewis and BJ Foster, and who would also describe themselves as just slightly above average dads. And so between the three of us, we have kids in all ages and all stages, and we just always ask one question. Bobby, what is our question of the week?
Question of the week is a good one. I like this a lot. It is, why is it important to remember what my dad did well?
On allprodad.com, we have a lot of posts, a lot of articles. BJ's got the most, for sure, and I would say the best. But I've written one about why that's important to remember that. Because I think, as somebody that's done a lot of counseling, I think so much of counseling, and this has probably been true, I don't know, since the beginning of counseling, I don't know, but that we really focus on childhood wounds, which I think is very, very important. I think we need to do that. I know every counselor on the planet, if they're listening, is going, yes, that's important to do that. But there have been a couple of times that I thought, man, I feel like I've processed a lot of childhood wounds, but I think it would be helpful to think about what my dad did right. What about you guys? Do you think, why would it be important to think back about what our dads did right?
I actually think about it in terms of the way we interact with people day to day. And I say that meaning we can go through an entire day, meet 100 people, 99 say something good about us, one says something bad, and you're laying on the pillow at night, you're like, that one comment, like, man, that one negative thing. So I think our brains naturally pick out the negative, but your entire day wasn't negative. You had one negative experience. You had 99 positive experiences. And I hope that, at least it was for me, and I hope it was for you guys, that you had positive experience with your dad, and hopefully the positive experiences outweighed the negatives. And for us to dwell on the negatives, I think discredit the positives in some way. So I think if we can dwell on the positive, then it just changes our entire outlook with our dads, and then we can apply that same principle to us as dads now and say, hey, 20, 30, 40 years from now, I hope my kids look back and say, yeah, dad did some things that were wrong, and I wish it hadn't happened that way, but I really appreciate the things he did well. That's my hope and my prayer for my kids.
BJ, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it makes us feel more gratitude, and the more gratitude we have, I think we find more contentment. So, if we can think about our dads in the way that they did things well, again, I think it's a good practice to kind of go through and unpack wounds, but I don't think we focus on this enough. The things that not just our dads but our moms, everything that they did well, and be grateful for them.
That's good. I think another thing that really sparked this for me is I've got a 20-year-old son and 23-year-old son and 18-year-old daughter, 13-year-old daughter too, but especially for the older ones, I want them to look back on their childhood as something good where they felt that I loved and supported them. And the selfish part of that is I worked really hard and I tried really hard to be intentional. Like, let's just call it what it is. But the other part of it was I think it would be really good for their souls to remember their childhood that way. Not remember me as perfect, but remember he was there for me and he loved me. And so based on that, he is still here for me. And so I was talking to my 23-year-old about a tough season of his life that, his mom and I were we weren't sleeping. We're consulting experts. And it was all that I could think about because it was a really scary time. And he and I talked about it, and he said, Dad, I just felt like you didn't care. And that's his feelings, right? And so I can't say, well, that's it. But I did almost, I came back and went, and I got real defensive. I said, buddy, I thought about nothing else during that time. And he handled that really well. And he actually came back to me on that one, and he goes, Dad, I think that was a lie that I had told myself, is that you didn't care. But looking back, I thought, I want them to think about that I did love them so much. So for you guys, what was something that you feel like your dads did right?
I think my dad, one of the things that he really did well is you could mess up and he handled it really well. Like there wasn't a condemnation to him. He never felt judgment. He didn't, he tended to not overreact. It was just kind of, okay, do this moving forward. And I think it's because my dad was kind of, he was kind of a rebel a little bit and had done things in his, when he was younger that was far worse than anything I did. And so I did my stuff and he was like, yeah, maybe don't do that. Like it's, moving forward.
In comparison to what I did, this is nothing.
This is nothing. Yeah. I'll never forget. I was going to do this joking thing to a friend of my sister's who was dropping her off. Like I was going to just bump her car in the driveway, and it went up on the bumper and it scraped it and it ripped the paint off. And I came in the next day, and my dad was on the phone, and I think he was on the phone with the other dad, and the other dad was just yelling. And my dad just, okay, all right. And he just got off the phone and he goes, you're going to have to give an insurance check to them for the bumper. So maybe don't do that anymore. And that was it. I was waiting for a punishment or whatever, but he was so chill about it.
Yeah. And so he didn't need to make you feel bad about it. You already did.
Oh yeah. I already felt
you
horrible.
writing a check sounds like punishment to me.
Yeah. Well, I had to take the check to them. And so that was to walk in there to give the check to the other dad who was just off his rocker mad, was just kind of, he was staring at me the whole time. The mom was like, oh, thank you so much. She was like, and he's just staring at me.
So he did the right thing. It was still a punishment, but he did it with no fanfare or loudness or whatever. And that's one of the things you remember to go, because when you think about that, you had to take the check to her dad. Like it wasn't like, hey, don't even worry about it. I got you. It was a little bit, don't worry about it, but you're going to have to do this.
Right.
There's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Bobby, what about you?
Well, I have two dad experiences. My parents divorced when I was 5, 6, something like that. And then my mom remarried when I was 10. So I have two dad stories. The first one was bad. The second one was great. And so when I think about what my dad did right, and when I say my dad, I'm talking about my stepdad now, who we call dad. I talked to him yesterday. I haven't talked to my biological dad in 20 years. Who knows how long. So when I think about what my biological dad did right, I was so young, I just don't really have many memories of it. But when I think about what my stepdad, man that I call dad, did right, I think the first thing that comes to mind was he showed up. And treated my mom with respect and dignity. And I know people get divorced. I understand that. There's differences of opinions. People grow apart. Like, I get it. Like, divorce happens. But I think there's a difference between we got divorced just because we just kind of realized that we weren't good for each other and I just left. There's two different situations there. And that was the experience for me, was my dad just left. And so when my stepdad comes along...
Can I pause you on that just a second? Did you remember the conversation with your dad when he left, or did you just, is that okay to ask that?
Yeah. No. When he left, I remember coming home from school. I was first grade, maybe, going to the bus stop. My mom always met me at the bus stop because there's like 2 or 3 houses down. She didn't come out that day. And I was like, well, this is weird. What's going on? And I just remember walking in and she was just sitting on the bed crying. And that was it. And I never saw my dad again until I think it was like high school graduation or something like that. Maybe once or twice in there somewhere. But I just remember my mom being so sad. And so I remember when she remarried, modeling my life after that man. And every single time I came home, he was there and mom wasn't crying anymore. And I was like, man, that's what he did right. He was there just every single day. And so when I think about like individual conversations, I don't have that many of those where, you had this experience with the bumper in the car. I don't have tons of those, but what I do have is a daily demonstration of doing the right thing. And I think we can do that as dads. There's going to be profound moments where someone messes up and you have that one-on-one conversation with your 12-year-old, 15-year-old, 18-year-old, whatever, and you can really pour into them in that moment. But I think just as important as those individual moments when we talk about doing things right as dads, it's like just being around to have the conversation when the time comes. And, that's what I want to focus on. And not so much do I have the magic words at the right moment to just, piece them all together to smooth over whatever situation comes up. But I want my kids to remember that dad was there and that dad was available if they ever needed to talk about something. That I think is pretty important.
That speaks to dads listening too, right? To say, hey, just your presence, just the fact you're not giving up, just the fact that you're there is a really big deal. Bobby, and you're
struggling through something hard, like parenting, fatherhood is a difficult thing. I mean, we sit up here and we have these conversations and a lot of them are lighthearted. We did this episode on how to have fun at Christmas and how to have fun with your kids and play games. Those are great. But like, we don't want to sugarcoat it. Like being a dad's really hard, or it can be really hard. There's all sorts of stuff out of your control. I'm a guy who likes to have control and like to have like my hands on stuff because I feel more comfortable that way. But there's so much in life you just don't have control over. And if you don't run away from it and you're like, I'm just going to try to get through however I get through this situation, the best of my ability, I think that is a demonstration of doing the right thing every single day for your kids. And so my hope is that, dads who maybe are struggling, who are listening to this or watching this, and they're like, I don't feel like I've been doing the right thing lately. Being there for your kids is the right thing, and you can find your way while you're with them. And I think that's just as powerful as anything you could ever say.
You're there steady.
Yeah. The mooring for their, for them in their storm, because there's storms in life. I had a pastor once tell us that there's only 3 stages of life. It's you're going into a storm, in a storm, coming out of a storm. And so for kids, that storm could be, oh, so-and-so picked on me at school, or, oh, so-and-so said something mean to me, or, oh, I didn't make the soccer team, or whatever, or I got a bad grade. There's storms that come and go in your kid's life. They need to be moored to something, and you are that something. You're that steady, solid foundation. And, that's what we get right, is just being around, I think.
That has a whole new meaning for me. Gosh, I'm getting a little emotional, but my mom passed away when I was 10. I've said that a couple times on the podcast. And we were surrounded by family, like on both sides. I mean, my dad's a farmer and there's like 7 family homes on the farm. So we were around aunts and uncles and cousins and all that. So that was a blessing. But I think what my dad could have done at 10 and my brother's 12 would have been, and there was offers for this, go live with your aunt and uncle, go live with your grandmother, because they were right down the street. And he is 33 years old. I mean, he and my mom got married really early, and he's working all the time. And so I don't think a person on the planet, including me, would have been, hey, he shouldn't have done that. But he recently said something to me, and my dad doesn't say a lot, and he said, yeah, so-and-so said that you should come live with them. And I said, over my dead body. And so his heart was broken. My parents loved each other. I watched my dad I've watched him be a great husband to 2 very different women. He's been great, but he loved my mother and he loves my stepmother. But I never doubted that. Like, I work in the marriage space primarily, and I don't have this tragic story of going, hey, I'm do this because I've watched such a poor example. I watched my dad, but I think my dad being there, Bobby, to your point, was just huge. Like, I'm not going anywhere. Your whole world just got turned upside down, but I'm not going anywhere. Was everything handled perfectly? Not a chance. Yeah. I mean, that situation, who knows what to do? So I think that was huge. And so here's this farmer having to be mom and dad. And, research shows that people come into the world a certain way when it comes to how they process and how they think. And some people come in the world processing things through feelings. That was definitely me. Definitely me. Had high-strung emotions. I was a tantrum thrower. Like, I did not know how to get a hold of myself. But my dad was there, and it wasn't easy for him. So he would just let me be sad. I mean, he would let me cry. He didn't try to talk me out of it. And so that was huge. Like, looking back now, and it's, as I've been part of All Pro Dad now and having to process who my dad was, man, it's been good to process him through this lens of what he did right.
And I think when you're actually sit down and you get intentional about it, I would hope that most of the people listening to this would have good memories. I get it. There's bad dads, the dads who just, they didn't do it right. And, whether it was stress or whatever, it doesn't really matter the reason. Sometimes dads get it wrong. But my hope is that we did more right than wrong. And even if that's not the case, it can be used as an opportunity for you in the moment. If you had a dad that was not what you expected, that you can use that as ammunition to be a better dad for your kids now.
Right.
And then challenge yourself to make sure you're doing the right thing or get it right more than wrong as a dad.
Right. There's definitely people listening to this episode, they probably didn't push play because they're going, my dad didn't do anything right.
Yeah.
I have no content. We want to acknowledge that. To say some of you, if you started doing this with your biological dad, it's a short episode for you, right? But
well, I remember every year we go to church on Mother's Day and Father's Day, or the Sunday around, whether I think it always falls on a weekend, but we're sitting there and, there's always a caveat to, whoever's speaking. It's Happy Mother's Day. And we understand that this can be a tough day for some of you, or Happy Father's Day. We understand this can be a tough day for some of you because either, mom or dad has passed away, or because mom and dad just weren't good moms and dad. They weren't what you needed them to be. And that's hard, because I would hope that as a dad, I would be celebrated by my kids one day as being a dad who is always there. But there's many people who just won't have that uplifting experience. And that breaks my heart. I think that's the whole point of this podcast, to challenge dads to get it right. Not to just assume that the kids are going to be thankful just because, they have your last name,
Yeah. And I think there's this line too of saying, I'm never going to do what my dad did, but what if we made the promise to also say, but I am going to do this? BJ, so for your dad, one of the things you said that your dad was, it's kind of kickback when things get wrong. What's another example for you?
He would always come to all of my events. I mean, I think I've talked about this in other podcasts. He was a salesman and he would travel for like 2-3 weeks at a time.
Oh, wow.
So it would be so exciting. I'd be at a Friday soccer practice and all of a sudden I would look over and he was sitting in the stands watching a 3-hour practice, like not a game, a practice, because he wanted to be there. When I'd come home on a Friday night from being out with my friends, he'd be sitting at the kitchen table with a chessboard and the candles lit.
So that's why you're so good at chess.
Just, I don't know if I'm that good, but from age 6 on, he would do that. He would take out the chessboard and he'd be sitting there waiting for me. He would take me out on the golf course and we'd sit in the golf cart for 4 hours and together. And he was never in a hurry. Like he whenever we had moments, like he was never really in a hurry. So those were, he always kind of had these moments where he was just there. He was just there. He would just show up and it was, he'd come to all of my soccer games and he wasn't loud about it. He just sat there and watched me play. And then afterwards he would say something along the lines of, "That's just brilliant what you did today." Like out there.
That's so powerful.
Yeah, I love that. I love it. I just thought of something that my dad did that I really do appreciate, and I'm kind of a perfectionist to a fault. I'm always trying to hold myself to a very high standard, no matter what I'm doing, and perfection can be an enemy sometimes, if that's the way to put it. Like, it's great to strive for things, but if anything short of perfection is considered failure, you're really harming yourself. And so my dad reminded me of that a lot because, I played baseball growing up. In baseball, there's just no chance for you to be perfect. No one bats 1,000. You're going to make an error. You're going to miss a catch or whatever. And so he would tell us all the time, like, just do your best. And that's good enough. It's hard when, for someone like me who's a perfectionist, it's hard to strive over and over and over and consistently fail because it wasn't perfect. So to have a reminder from someone to say, like, you're good enough as you are, that's big.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yep. I think, it's so funny, and I don't know how this works, but as a Christian, I look back, and I don't know how this works, but I look back and think, God knew what I needed in a dad, right? God knew what I needed, and my dad was not mean. He was just never mean. Like he would get frustrated with me because I was so frustrating. Again, I've teased about having ADHD since long before it was cool to have it. And there were so many things so many things. And he would get frustrated with me. He asked the question a lot, what were you thinking? And I'd be like, I wasn't. There was zero thought before I did that, zero. And this is way before we knew what ADHD was. So he would ask that question, but he was never mean to me, ever. Like never, ever mean to me. And he would be protective when he needed to be protective. But I just think, looking back, going, though the fact that the things he did not do of not being mean was one of the biggest things that he did. What do you guys think's the payoff for this, to remember what our dads did right? Like, why is this an important thing?
I think memories are powerful, negative or positive. And like I said earlier, when we first started talking about this, that negativity bias that we all kind of have, you hear 99 compliments and one disparaging thing. We tend to meditate on the negative things, but if we could flip that and we could start to realize that there's a lot more good typically happening than bad. They don't weigh the same, if you can put it that way. I think that if we start to think about all the good things our dad did, then it will just reorient the bad, as not so much a dad was a bad guy, but dad was a guy who did bad things occasionally. And I don't think that it's healthy for us to constantly dwell on all the bad things, put them in their proper context, but it'll warp and shape the way that we think of our dad maybe in a negative light when hopefully we had more positive experience. I know I did.
Yeah, I think that's good. I would say that, the more you meditate and think about the good things, the more you emulate those, good and good things. There's a scripture verse that talks about that. What's ever good, think about it, meditate on it. And so you meditate about those things your dad did well, and you're going to be doing them with your kids.
I love that. That's the verse I keep coming back to. And I tell married couples this all the time. Run your spouse through Philippians 4:8, because it starts with whatever's true. Like,
noble,
Paul's talking about what are you thinking about? He says, I'll tell you what to think about. Think about what's true. And so the true is some of the wounds, right? So the true is like, we need to process that. Whatever's true, whatever's noble, whatever's right. And then it ends with, if there's anything excellent or praiseworthy, think on such things. And so I think as a dad who cares, and you guys care, and I know everybody listening really cares, I feel like in some ways we owe it to our dads to run them through this filter. This filter we hope our kids are going to run us through. I need to be less high-strung and more like my dad. I need to be more Eeyore and less Tigger as a dad. So for the Winnie the Pooh reference, which is super relevant right now.
You need to be more Eeyore?
I think I need to be, no, I need to be more Tigger.
You need to be more Tigger.
Let's just pull the whole, I don't know where that came from.
Don't be Piglet.
It is the 4th episode, and I am
Eeyore's the bad one. Tigger, you want to be more Tigger.
Yeah. I want to be
I want to be Owl.
You want to be Owl? Yeah. Let me be Owl.
Falsely wise.
Yeah.
Falsely wise.
Yeah. Falsely wise.
But I can fly.
But he can fly. How about we be no cartoon characters in this episode by saying, hey, bottom line is remembering what your dad did right helps you to get it right as a dad. And I do believe that's true. And so, Bobby, we always want to leave listeners with what?
A pro move. And this is something that hopefully you can put into practice ideally today, tomorrow, this weekend. But this week's pro move is simple. Tell your dad what he did right. I know that sometimes it's going to get people out of their comfort zone because maybe it's not the easiest thing to express. If you don't feel comfortable calling up dad and saying, Dad, I really loved when you did this, write it down. Write a letter, send him a text, but express to your dad what he did right. If it's possible, if dad has passed away, obviously, that can be a hurt, but tell someone else. Tell someone what your dad did. You need to get this off your chest and say, listen, here's what you did right, and I appreciated it. And I really think it'll help you.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you for listening. We know that you and your kids will be glad that you did. Thanks for listening to the All Pro Dad podcast. All Pro Dad is the fatherhood program of the nonprofit Family First. Along with our motherhood program, iMom, we exist to help you love your family well. Subscribe to our daily email, the All Pro Dad Play of the Day, by going to allprodad.com/subscribe and get daily powerful and practical fatherhood tips in your inbox. The All Pro Dad podcast is hosted by me, Ted Lowe, produced by Bobby Lewis.